Old Bailey. Okay. Newgate Prison was a prison at the corner of Newgate Street and Old Bailey, just inside the city of London. There it is in 1810. Can you see that? Originally at the site of Newgate. Newgate was one of the historic 7 gates of the London Wall around the city of London, and one of the 6 which date back to Roman times. Newgate lay on the west side of the wall, and the road issuing from it headed over the River Fleet to Middlesex and western England. A gate in the Roman London Wall. The London Wall is a defensive wall first built by the Romans around the strategically important port town of Londinium in 200 AD. It was demolished in 1904. Built in the 12th century. The prison was extended and rebuilt many times and remained in use for over 700 years, from 1188 to 1902. In the late 18th century, executions by hanging were moved here from the Tyburn gallows. I think Colonel Hunks, if that's his name. See if I can find him real quick. Yep. Tyburn gallows. October 19, 1660. Colonel Hunks, one of the guys who signed, or he actually had his name forged by Oliver Cromwell on the King Charles I execution warrant. And he actually would have been given immunity with everyone else, but they fucking found the actual physical original execution warrant with his name on it in his possession, and they were like, yeah, you gotta go. God damn, they did the executions, and well, that's not crazy because they cut the king's head off in front of everyone. These took place on the public street in front of the prison, drawing crowds until 1868 when they were moved into the prison. Yeah, the Old Bailey. Courthouses. Henry II instituted legal reforms that gave the crown more control over the administration of justice. Prison was destroyed in the Great Fire of London in 1666 and was rebuilt in 1672. I get out of this. Okay, there we go. Newgate Exercise Yard, 1872. What is this? Elevation and Plan of Newgate Prison, published in 1800. Prison Chapel. Goddamn, execution by hanging outside Newgate, early 1800s. A door from the prison, 1780, now in the collection of the Museum of London. The second Newgate Prison, a west view of Newgate, 1810. (1896). Newgate execution bell, now in the church. Let's see, executions. In 1783, the site of London's gallows were moved from Tyburn to Newgate. Public executions outside the prison. By this time, London's main prison continued to draw large crowds. It was also possible to visit the prison by obtaining a permit from the Lord Mayor of the City of London or a sheriff. Damn, 1807. Okay, wait. Dense crowds of thousands of spectators could pack the streets to see these events. And in 1807, dozens died at a public execution when part of the crowd of 40,000 spectators collapsed into a crowd crush. In November 1835, James Pratt and John Smith were the last two men to be executed for sodomy. Holy shit. Well, sometimes history takes a wild turn. James Pratt, also known as John Pratt and John Smith, were two British men who in November 1835 became the last people to be executed for sodomy in England. I hate that I know that this was probably the technical term that they were charged with, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but when you keep using words like this, you make it sound like they did something wrong. They didn't do that. Well, as we'll keep reading, I bet. Last people to be executed for sodomy in England. Pratt and Smith were arrested in August of that year after being spied on through a keyhole, allegedly having carnal knowledge of each other in a room rented by William Bunnell, a friend or acquaintance of one of the men, or possibly both. Bunnell, although not present when the men were spied on, was nevertheless transported to the Austria. Between 1788 and 1686. No, 1868. The British penal system transported about 162,000 convicts from Great Britain and Ireland to various penal colonies in Australia. So, damn, the friend wasn't even there. He was transported to Australia as an accessory to Pratt and Smith's alleged crime, where he died. Some modern human rights activists have cast doubt on the facts and legality of the conviction. In January 2017, Pratt and Smith were among those who were posthumously pardoned by the Alan Turing law. Alan Turing, that's a whole nother turn. Poor man. The government castrated him for being gay. I don't know how, because I'm not smart in this area, but they credit Alan Turing with being like the true father of AI, although AI did not exist at the time. I don't know if he was before his time or he made all the calculations that would be later used to make AI. Somehow he gets credited with being the father of AI. And the government castrated him. I think he ended up killing himself. I'm sorry. I don't even know. I'm really sorry if I use words that are offensive or sensitive or hurtful to anyone. I'm learning as I go on what to say and not to say and how to say things. I do like calling things what they are, though, sometimes, because I just think that it's just better if we just do that. Like here, like they weren't executed for sodomy. They were executed for being gay. For having a romantic and intimate relationship with each other. And that's what it should say. Which pardon those who have been convicted of same-sex carnal offenses which no longer exists in the UK. William Bonnell, age 68, had lived for 13 months in a rented room at a house near the Blackfriars Road, Southwark, London. His landlord stated that Bonnell had frequent male visitors who generally came in pairs, and that his suspicions became aroused on the afternoon of the 29th of August, 1835, when Pratt and Smith came to visit Bonnell. The landlord climbed to an outside vantage point in the loft of the nearby stable building, where he could see through the window of Bonnell's room, before coming down to look into the room through the keyhole. Both the landlord and his wife later claimed they both looked through the keyhole and saw Pratt and Smith engaging in carnal relations with each other. The landlord, after seeing what he saw, broke open the door to confront them. Bonnell was absent but returned a few minutes later with a jug of ale. The landlord went to fetch a police constable, and all three men were arrested. Pratt, Smith, and Bonnell were tried on 21st of September 1835 at the Central Criminal Court. Central Criminal Court before Baron Gurney, a judge who had the reputation of being independent and acute, but also harsh. Pratt and Smith were convicted under Section 15 of the Offenses Against the Person Act 1828, which had replaced the 1533 Buggery Act and were sentenced to death. William Bonnell was convicted as an accessory and sentenced to 14 years of penal transportation. A number of witnesses came forward to testify to the good character of Pratt. No character witnesses came forward to testify on behalf of Smith. The conviction of 3 men rested entirely on what the landlord and his wife claimed to have witnessed and the evidence of the police constable who had examined the clothing of both men after his arrival at Bond Hill's lodging house. Modern commentators have cast doubts on their testimony based on the narrow field of vision afforded by keyhole in the axe. Some anatomically impossible. The couple claimed to have witnessed during the brief length of time they were looking. But what's the matter? I'm like, why would someone care so much to find out whether or not their testimony was true or not? Let's just say it was true. Who cares? Man, there was an appeal for mercy submitted by the men's wives that was heard by the Privy Council. A petition for mercy was even made by the landlord and his wife, the ones who got them convicted, who had been witnesses against him. But they guess they didn't care. Pratt and Smith were hanged in front of Newgate Prison on the morning of 27th of November. The crowd of spectators was described in the Times newspaper report as larger than usual. This was possible because the hanging was the first to have taken place at Newgate in nearly 2 years. The report of the execution in the Morning Post states that when the men were led into the scaffold, the crowd began to hiss, and this continued until the moment of their execution. Possibly this indicated the crowd's disagreement with the execution, or it may have indicated disapproval of the men's alleged acts. Pratt was reportedly too weak to stand and had to be held upright by the executioner's assistants while preparations were made to hang him. The event was sufficiently notable for a printed broadside to be published and sold. This described the men's trial and included the purported text of a final letter that was claimed to have been written by Smith to a friend. Bonnell was one of 290 prisoners transported to Australia on the ship Asia, which departed England on the 5th of November in 1835 and arrived in Van Diemen's Land, now Tasmania, on 21st February 1836. Bonnell died at the age of 74 at the New Norfolk Hospital in Van Diemen's Land on 29th April 1841. Tasmania. I wonder if that was before or after. Let's see. I think I'm gonna say like 1830s. Nah. 1890s. I'm gonna say like in the 1890s, the very last Tasmanian man uh was was alive. Before that race went, that culture went instinct. The last Tasmanian man. What year did the last Tasmanian man pass away? 1869. William Lanny. William Lanny is considered the last full-blooded Tasmanian Aboriginal man, and his death in 1869 is widely recognized as marking the end of the Tasmanian Aboriginal population. William Lanny, also known as King Billy. Lanny was born into the indigenous Tarkiener clan. Tarkiener clan of remote northwestern Tasmania. Let's look this up and see if, just out of love and respect. Tarkeen? Tarkeen? Takaner. Trakaner? That ain't even the right word. Tarkeen. Clan of the remote northwestern Tasmania. Around 1836, he probably belonged to the last Aboriginal family group which was living a traditional lifestyle on mainland Tasmania after the policies of the colonial British government had either killed or removed almost the entire remaining Aboriginal population. In December 1842, Laney's family group, which included his father and mother, his 4 brothers, and himself as a young child, made contact at Arthur River with employees of the Van Diemen's Land Company, which had an extensive land grant in the region. His father answered to the name of Lana or Lani, and this was the surname that was applied to the whole family. The Lani family were quickly shipped off to Aboriginal internment camp at Byllynge on Flinders Island, where around 180 other Tasmanian Aboriginal people were exiled after their forced removal from the mainland. At Byllynge, Lonnie was given the English first name of William and was reunited with his adolescent sister Victoria, who had been taken by sealers before being sent to Flinders Island. The establishment of Byllynge was poorly maintained and riddled with sickness. The previously healthy family rapidly succumbed to infectious respiratory diseases. Lonnie's father, mother, and two of his brothers died within a year of their arrival. His sister Victoria gave birth to a boy named George before she also died in 1847 along with another of his brothers. Victoria's skeleton is believed to have been later dug up from the Byllynge. Cemetery and sold for the modern equivalent of £3,000 to the Royal Byllynge Institute of Natural Sciences, where her remains are still located. In 1847, the 47 surviving Aboriginal people at Byllynge were transferred to an equally unhealthy facility at Oyster Cove on mainland Tasmania. This group included William Laney, his brother Charlie, and his infant nephew George. Charlie was given to a local settler and was never heard of again. George died around 1852. William was sent to an orphanage in Hobart, where he lived a miserable existence until 1853, when he was returned to Oyster Cove. William was the only child from Byllynge who survived to adulthood. At the Oyster Cove Aboriginal establishment, Lonnie was adopted by fellow Indigenous survivors, Walter George Arthur and his wife Marianne Robinson. He was a whaler. Lonnie had a good-humored personality, was well-spoken and admired among the Hobart community. He is recorded as advocating for improving the living arrangements of the women at Oyster Cove settlement by writing to colonial officials in 1864. He formed a relationship with Truganini and was generally regarded as being her spouse during this period. Who is that? Oh, okay. She was was a woman famous for being widely described as the last full-blooded Aboriginal Tasmanian to survive British colonization, although she was one of the last speakers of the indigenous Tasmanian languages. Oh, he was introduced as the king of the Tasmanians. Oh, he was only 33 when he passed. Oh. Whoa. Yo, tonight took a wild turn, man. After returning from a whaling voyage on the Runnymede, which had been operating in the southern Pacific Ocean, Lonnie was paid off and went to live at the Dog and Partridge Hotel at the corner of Goulburn and Baroque Streets in Hobart Town. Lonnie died there 2 weeks later on the 3rd of March, 1869, from a combination of alcohol poisoning, cholera, and he was around 33 years old. Following his death, Lonnie's body was mutilated and dismembered as part of a dispute between the Royal College of Surgeons and the Royal Society of Tasmania over who should possess his remains. A member of the Royal College of Surgeons named William Crowther applied to the government for permission to obtain and send the skeleton to the college's headquarters in London, which his request was denied. Crowther ignored this decision and managed to break into the Hobart morgue where Lonnie's body was kept. He dissected the corpse, removing Lonnie's skull and replacing it with the skull of Thomas Ross, a recently deceased white school teacher whose body was also in the morgue. However, Sir James Agnew and George Stockwell from the Royal Society of Tasmania soon discovered Crowther's work and decided to thwart any further attempts by Crowther to collect samples by amputating Lonnie's hands and feet. After cutting off Lonnie's appendages, Stockwell gave them to his associate John Woodcock Graves, who stuffed them in his pockets as he left the morgue. Lonnie's funeral occurred the next day at St. David's Church. It was organized by his whaling company employer, who had his coffin draped in a possum-skinned rug with spears placed on top. The captain of the Runnymede and 3 of Lonnie's shipmates were pallbearers, and they carried his casket to the church cemetery where it was interred. The following morning, it was discovered that Lonnie's grave had been dug up and the remaining parts of his corpse had been removed. Thomas Ross's skull, which had been inserted in Lonnie's head, was found discarded amongst the other headstones. Ross's skull was placed into Lonnie's empty coffin and reinterred. An inquiry was quickly organized into the death of Lonnie's body, but was abandoned for political reasons. Stockwell accused Crowther of stealing the corpse. Crowther, on the other hand, claimed he went to the hospital with a police escort, where he found Stockwell removing Lonnie's bones from his corpse in an indecent manner in which messes of fat and blood were all over. Because he was accused of theft of Lonnie's head and the illicit use of another white person's head, Crowther's? Is it Crowther's? I'm going to go Crowther's honorary appointment as surgeon at the Colonial Hospital was terminated. Yet in 1869, the Council of the Royal College of Surgeons awarded him a gold medal and the first fellowship of the college ever awarded to an Australian. Crowther later became Premier of Tasmania. Crowther claimed that because Lonnie had lived much of his life within the European community, his brain had exhibited physical changes, demonstrating the improvement that takes place in a lower race when subjected to the effects of education and civilization. Other colonists took note of Crowther's act. A fracas occurred outside the council chamber, Hobart Town, a few nights ago. Mr. Crowther, member of Hobart Town, threatened his colleague, Mr. Kinnerly, with personal violence because of the latter's allusion to Mr. Crowther's alleged abstraction of the last Aboriginal's head. Mr. Kinnerly called the attention of the House to the circumstance, and Mr. Crowther was reprimanded. Crowther, it seems, retained Laney's skull, which was probably donated to the Anatomy Department of the University of Edinburgh in 1888 by his son, Dr. Edward Crowther. The rest of Laney's skeletons appears most likely to have been retained in the Royal Society of Tasmania's museum. In the early 1990s, the University of Edinburgh repatriated a skull to the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, believed to be that of William Lonnie. However, it is disputed that this was in fact Lonnie's skull. It is possible that Lonnie's skeleton was also given to the TAC for cremation in a batch of ancestral remains returned by the Royal Society around the same time. Whew.